Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day, and welcome to this month's Out and Equal Town Call, Global Perspectives and LGBT Business Imperative. Today we are thrilled to be joined by three knowledgeable people on this call who will share with you some of the work that is being done around the world to advance LGBT workplace equality. My name is John Henderson, and I'm the Chief Program Officer at Out and Equal. At this point, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers to you. They will each provide you an overview of their work and their global perspectives on LGBT issues. First, we will hear from Celeste Berry. Celeste is founder and Chief Executive Officer of Out and Equal Workplace Advocates. Under her leadership, the organization has grown significantly both in the U.S. and globally, with dramatic increases in attendance for the annual Workplace Summit since 1999, with the first global attendees coming to the summit in 2003. She has led the organization in expanding its mission through global partnerships and initiatives, including Global Summit and Forum. Second, we will hear from Kevin Burns, Program Manager for Community Business. Since joining Community Business in 2009, Kevin has been a key driver behind Community Business Creating Inclusive Workplaces for LGBT Employees campaign. That campaign aims to raise awareness of LGBT issues and push companies in Asia to adopt best practice. He has played an essential role in the development of groundbreaking research on LGBT issues in Asia and has developed and run many workshops and trainings for companies across Asia on LGBT workplace issues. Finally, we are excited to be joined by Lakshmi Shubha, who is with Thomson Reuters. Lakshmi started her career at Reuters in London in 2002 and now heads the strategic business planning for global growth and operations. She is based in Bangalore, India. Lakshmi attended her first Out and Equal Summit in 2013 and the Out and Equal Global Roundtable in Bangalore in 2014. The energy and leadership at that summit inspired her to co-found Pride Speak India, which brings panels of LGBT voices to corporate audiences, sparking dialogue and advancing the conversation around workplace diversity and inclusion in India. Now, before we start the webinar, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Q Wilson, who will take you through some announcements. Q?
Thank you so much, John. For some of the announcements we have for Out and Equal are our upcoming webinars. The next few webinars that we have coming up for our town calls. June 26th, the topic will be executives in LGBT workplaces, but LGBT executive in the workplace. July 31st will be LGBT retirement and the next frontier. And our August town call will be families and work life, finding the connection. We're going to be on the road just a little bit this summer. You'll be able to find our Director of Training, Pat Bailey, at our booth at the Annual Society for Human Resource Management Conference, SHRM, in Orlando, Florida in June. Our booth number is 747, just like the Vader Point, 747. Please stop by and visit Pat for information and any questions you might have regarding Out and Equal. And of course, November 3rd through the 6th is the Out and Equal Annual Workplace Summit, which is being held here in San Francisco, California this year. If you have any other questions or you'd like to find out what else is going on with training, please go to our website at outandequal.org and click the town call or training link. I'd also like to go over just really quickly. There are some webinar features I'd like to address for you. We have here, during this presentation, all of your lines will be muted. You can always chat to us using the chat box on the left-hand side of your screen there, right here. If you have any technical problems, please raise your hand. There should be a raise your hand button up here, and someone will assist you with that as well. Today we do have a few polls. So with the poll, select your answer, hit submit, and that way you can see the results. And of course, this session will be recorded, and we'll send out a link for review as well as a link with the slide deck for today's presentation They'll be made available also on the website at outandequal.org if you go to the town call section. Okay, with that, I'll turn it back over to John.
Thank you, Q. And without any further ado, it is now my pleasure to turn this over to Celeste Berry, the CEO of Out and Equal Workplace Advocates. Good morning, Celeste.
Morning, John. Well, thank you, John, and thank you to all of you for being part of this very important conversation. Let's see if we can move the, there we go. It's an exciting topic to talk about LGBT workplace equality around the globe. It's both exciting and, as I'm sure folks on the call know, it's very complicated and complex. We live in a very interesting time where we can be married in 17 countries, and marriage equality is the law of the land, and in close to 80, we can be arrested, imprisoned, and even killed simply for being lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. So we at Out and Equal are very invested in changing this reality and want to do this important work along with our partners. We've, as John mentioned, we've had global participation in the Out and Equal Workplace Summit since 2003, and in the last few years we've had over 30 countries that are represented at our annual summit. So it in itself is becoming much more global. But for the last 10 years, we've had ongoing conversations with our partners and our sponsors about being able to provide more resources for multinational companies trying to navigate these complex LGBT equality waters around the globe. So in 2012, we put a stake in the ground and said, you know, it's time to just say publicly that we're going global, and it became one of the 4 pillars of our strategic plan. So over the years, since the mid-2000s, both myself and my colleagues have been speaking at and participating in many conferences around the globe, including the UK and Italy, Denmark, Poland, Hungary, Mexico, Hong Kong, and our, as I mentioned, our global constituents at the Out and Equal Workplace Summit continue to grow with over 30 countries. Many of the conferences that I attended were, many of them were in Europe and coincided Euro Pride. So when World Pride was coming to London in 2012, we were the NGO that was invited to really plan and implement the business summit during World Pride. And so it was an amazing summit. It was very similar to an Out and Equal Workplace Summit in London, and people came from all over the world. So it was very successful. It was in July of 2012, and then we got back to our office in the States in San Francisco and started planning the Out and Equal Workplace, and didn't really start planning, but continued planning the Out and Equal Workplace Summit that was held in Baltimore that year. So it was a little difficult to pull off 2 big summits, but it was, both of them were very successful. So fast forward to 2014. Actually, in 2013, I started a conversation with Scott Beth at Intuit. Scott had been having lots of conversations with his colleagues in India, and in particular in Bangalore, and recognized that there hadn't been a lot of conversation around LGBT issues. And in fact, there was quite a lot of confusion and people, and not a lot of knowledge. And so we began the conversation about the idea of hosting our first global forum. And we had it just in January of this year in Bangalore with over 20 participants from Intuit, Dell, IBM, Google, Citi, and Thomson Reuters. Just a month before those of us that were coming to the forum from the United States, before we got on a plane to fly halfway around the world, the Indian Supreme Court came out with their decision to recriminalize homosexuality. And so there were lots of conversations about whether or not we were going to have the forum, whether we should move forward with it. But we talked to the leaders in Bangalore, and they said again and again, we need to have this conversation, and now's the best time to have this conversation. So it was very successful. Lakshmi was part of the conversation from Thomson Reuters and has done a great job of continuing that conversation beyond the January meeting, and I'm sure we'll hear more from Lakshmi in a little bit. We also are represented on the Council for Global Equality. My colleague Pat moderated a panel at the U.S. State Department around global LGBT issues. I was recently in Madrid at the International Gay and Lesbian Travel Association Global Convention, and my colleague Dan will be at the International LGBT Conference in Mexico. So lots of ways to continue to stay connected globally through Out and Equal. While I was in India in January, this is a photo of many of the folks that were part of that conversation, and I also had a wonderful opportunity to meet with NGO leaders there and get a sense of what their work is like on the ground, leading LGBT organizations and media opportunities in India. And of course had to bring a little Out and Equal love to the Taj Mahal. One of the things that we're focused on is really providing resources, and so we're putting together a global resource guide, and again this came out of just a lot of companies asking us to share best practices and help them navigate these waters. So the guide is being put together as we speak. It'll be including policies for global work assignments, global ways to roll out your policies, global non-discrimination policies around the world, et cetera. And so we've asked many of our partners, probably many of you on the call, to share with us what your policies are, and so that we can share those in a broader way so people can not have to start at ground zero each time. So as Q mentioned, the Out and Equal Workplace Summit will be in San Francisco November 3rd through 6th, and we're very excited to be in San Francisco. Once again, our global series will be sponsored by IBM, so we're thrilled about that. And we'll also have an opportunity for Global Perspectives Leadership Seminar at the summit. And again, there will be over 30 countries represented this year at the Out and Equal Workplace Summit. And our goal this year in 2014 is to continue to raise the bar. Every year the global series, I think, gets better and better, but to have our global offerings include and really champion speakers like Lakshmi, like Kevin that are on the call today, who live and work in places around the country, rather than having someone from LA or Chicago or New York talk about what it probably is like, actually having people that are living and working in places around the world. We've been working for the last year with a group from UCLA MBA School of Management, and had 5 wonderful students help us with our global strategy. And they've spent, 3 of them went to India and 2 of them went to Italy to interview people on the ground, and they've conducted many surveys, and again probably talked to many of you on the phone to find out what your company's doing. So they've come back with lots of recommendations and suggestions for us that we are reviewing and planning to roll out, but we're thrilled to have this invaluable strategic perspective. So moving forward, we will continue to advance LGBT workplace equality around the United States and around the globe. We're planning to host our next global forum in Brazil in 2015, and continue to share best practices, certainly with our global resource guide that we're hoping we will roll out this summer, and it'll start as an online resource. And we really approach all of our work with a global framework, and want to remind our brothers and sisters in places like Uganda and Iran and Russia that they are not alone, and will continue to work on their behalf and on the behalf of LGBT people everywhere. So thank you for that, and I'll turn it back to you, John.
Great. Thank you, Celeste. That's a great overview of the work that's taking place under your leadership here at Out and Equal. And just a reminder to everybody that is participating, we're going to save the questions until all three speakers have presented. So if you have questions, you can type them in any time, but we will get to those at the conclusion of the three speakers' presentation. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Kevin Burns, Program Manager for Community Business. And Kevin, I can actually say good morning to you because it is after midnight in Hong Kong, and we appreciate you being part of this webinar at this late hour or early hour of the morning.
Indeed, it is past midnight, but it's perfectly fine because I really, really enjoy the opportunity to share with all the audience members today and also hear from Celeste Berry about all the great work that Out and Equal is doing globally. Of course, the work that community business has done here in Asia in many ways has been made possible by leaders like Celeste Berry and Out and Equal. We absolutely look to organizations like Out and Equal for a lot of the inspiration that we've used to do our work here in Asia. So thank you again, John, for the introduction. You already did a great job introducing myself. I think what I'll do now is just go into a little bit about community business so you know who our organization is and what we do. So we're a nonprofit organization that works with companies on corporate social responsibility. And of course, CSR is an umbrella term, and it includes a number of many different things. For community business, it means helping companies with things like community investment, employee volunteering, work-life balance. And then probably the largest part of our work, and the work that we're very proud of, is our work on diversity and inclusion. And that covers a number of different things: gender, people with disabilities, culture, generations, so post-80s or Gen Y, and then the area that I spend 100% of my time on and have done so for the past 5 years, which is LGBT, or sexual orientation and gender identity, here in Asia. In this slide, I just want to give you a snapshot of the work that we've actually done here in Asia. So the first row of publications is an overview, our diversity country views, which looked into the top 5 kind of diversity issues in each one of the 5 countries there. In fact, the 5 countries that community business works in: mainland China, Hong Kong, India, Japan, and Singapore. And that, of course, includes an overview of the LGBT issues in each country. And then the specific research that we did was, the very first one was a resource guide for companies in Hong Kong. That resource guide goes into detail about the business case, what are the business reasons in that market for companies to take action, the local cultural and legal context, which you can imagine are very helpful to Western multinationals who need to understand the market that they're operating first before they get started on this topic. We also did a resource guide for India in 2012, and then we did a resource guide for mainland China in 2013. All really big projects, reaching out to as many local stakeholders as we could, local experts to advise our process and make sure it was locally relevant. We also had a number of other pieces of publication, like a climate study for Hong Kong, and our LGBT online resource, which you can get at lgbtinclusiveinclusiveasia.org. But that just gives you an overview of community business work and expertise on this topic. Now I want to give you a bit of context about what essentially we're talking about in Asia. A recent piece of research that I looked at out of the U.S. was the Power of Out 2.0, which I believe it was the Center for Talent and Innovation who put that together. And one of the statistics that they came up with is that 41% of LGBT individuals are still in the workplace. And I'm sure that varies, but I'm sure it's either close to or approximate the number of LGBT individuals who are still not open in the workplace. Obviously, when you look across Asia, that stands in sharp contrast. So the work community business did in Hong Kong found that 71% of LGBT individuals are not open, right, are still in the closet in Hong Kong. In India, an organization called Mingle did a piece of research asking LGBT individuals if they were open in the organization, and they said that 82% said that they were not fully open. And of course, in mainland China, strikingly, 94% of LGBT individuals said they were not open in the workplace. And of course, there's a number of reasons for this. In Asia, there are quite a few countries where there is still a law making same-sex behavior between two men illegal. For example, Singapore or India. There are very real situations where LGBT individuals are discriminated or harassed, cases where blackmail happens. So they're very, very real cases, but I would say one of the predominant reasons is actually the cultural reasons. There is a very real pressure in many Asian countries for LGBT individuals to get married and to have children. And I would say in sharp contrast to a lot of Western countries, there is a much more collectivist decision-making process, right? Our decision to get married is not our own in Asia, where it might be in the West. There's much more individualistic behavior in the U.S. You know, if your parents tell you not to do something in the U.S., you almost do it because our society there is so much more individualistic. So that's probably the prevailing reason why you have such numbers. Having said that, things are drastically changing. Since I've been living in Hong Kong for the past 6 years, the number of LGBT activities and just the sheer amount you hear about LGBT inclusion efforts have gone up tremendously. And I want to give you a snapshot of all of the different activities that are going on in Hong Kong. First of all, you have a number of networks popping up. The first here is the Hong Kong Gala, which is the Hong Kong Gay and Lesbian Attorneys Network. Gay and Lesbian Attorneys Network, which is essentially an inter-law network. That popped up just last year and is already churning out a number of events, essentially bringing the law firms into the 21st century in Hong Kong, because many of them had simply not been, I don't even want to say focusing on this, let's just say addressing this in the slightest in Asia or in Hong Kong. The LGBT Interbank had been around for many years, but has really been ramping up what they've been doing lately. You have a number of Idaho International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia events popping up. There's probably 2 or 3 different organizations organizing separate events to mark that important day. You have Pink Dot, which is a big event here in Asia, and I believe there's different Pink Dots popping up in the West as well, but I'll come back to that. There's a 2-month-long kind of festival with a number of different LGBT events, like the film festival, like Mr. Gay Hong Kong, which Hong Kong calls its Pink Season. There's a Pride Parade. There's Community Businesses Regional Diversity and Inclusion Conference, which this year is going to have its own track, a separate track just for LGBT workplace discussions, because there's been so much interest from the corporates. Out on the Street came to Asia late last year, and I really can't tell you how much interest this really brought. A lot of companies, for the very first time, brought their senior leaders to an LGBT-related event, which was a really positive thing. And then finally, Community Business is looking at launching its LGBT Workplace Inclusion Index, so something like an HRC index, something like a Stonewall index in Hong Kong. For me, that's tremendous. In Asia, I'm not keeping track of the different events and activities happening in a lot of the Western cities, but for Asia, Hong Kong stands out as one of the cities where there's a lot going on. That's not to say that Hong Kong is doing great. There's the Legislative Council, the legislature in writing laws to protect LGBT individuals has been stagnant. Nothing's really happened. But we're very, very hopeful that with kind of all the popular support that's coming up around this, that we'll actually get legislation. All right, moving to Singapore. And Singapore, of course, is a unique example. You have a very, very developed economy, but you have on the books a law that makes, again, same-sex behavior between two men illegal. And you also have an environment where protesting, rallies, is impractical. In fact, it's against the law. You cannot do it. There is only one park, Hin Leung Park, in Singapore, where you are allowed to practice free speech, essentially. And that is where Singapore hosts its Pink Dot. And since 2009, this event has been growing and getting bigger and bigger. And it's a very straightforward platform. They promote the freedom to love. And at this event, there are no speeches. It's just people showing up and caring for each other. Everyone's wearing pink. And as you can see in the photo, each year, the Pink Dot gets bigger and bigger and bigger. They've got tens of thousands of people showing up. So it's a really a tremendous event. The other thing that you see, and again, because companies and individuals are not able to come out and be very visible and vocal about this, you see a lot of internal events. So you see the banks coming together, and they've had an interbank network for many years now. And just recently, you've seen a number of energy companies begin to band together to create Energy. So that's been very positive. But just to give an example of kind of the backlash, right? So an investment bank, Goldman Sachs, hosted or is hosting a recruitment fair for LGBT individuals. And this, of course, got out to the media and became a whole issue. And one of the politicians in Singapore made a statement of respect local culture. Don't be very visible. Don't try to change local culture. And so there absolutely is that perspective, and a lot of companies, I think, are taking a very cautious approach in Singapore. All right, and mainland China, and as I mentioned before, mainland China probably has the lowest rates of out LGBT individuals in the workplace. Having said that, though, what we've seen over time is that the local organizations, which were originally set up and even sponsored by the government to address HIV and AIDS, have begun kind of changing their approach. It's not just focused on LGBT individuals anymore, and it's absolutely not trying to petition the government and change policy. They've now seen that there's an opportunity to engage with the companies. And of course, from the government perspective, that's not a contentious issue. Helping companies become more inclusive, essentially creating a more harmonious society and workplace, is very much in line with the government. So more recently, as companies have picked up the amount of D&I they're promoting, particularly Goldman Sachs and IBM, to be perfectly honest, you've seen more and more of the local advocacy pick up, because they've essentially found an avenue, an opportunity to engage with the community. But having said that, they still have a long ways to go. The big organizations there, iBuy, Shanghai Pride, have really only been around for 2 to 3 years, but they're, honest to God, they're picking up more and more momentum over the years. We saw some great strides in the last year. There was a really good event put on by the Shanghai LGBT Professionals Network just 2 months ago, bringing together more than 100 representatives from HR in companies in Shanghai. I do want to stop there. I know Rashmi, the other speaker, will actually cover some of the topics in India, so I won't go into that. We do a lot of work there, so if you do have any questions, I'd be happy to help with that. But that just gives you, again, an idea of the work that community business has done in Asia, and then I think a snapshot to the issues there in Asia and where some of these countries and territories are at. So with that, John, can I hand it back to you?
Yes, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate all the information that you shared. I think, touching on the balance of the respect for local culture is something that everybody is aware of, and I think that that's something that the balancing act and how you approach that is something that I think we'll hear a little bit more about. Just for everybody's notification, we have over 100 participants on this town call already, so that's fantastic. And with that, good evening, Lakshmi. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. I'm going to try not to kill you with PowerPoint, even though I do have a few slides before I get to what I'd really like to share with you, which is a very personal story. The power of us is my company, Thomson Reuters motto. Sorry. Oh, John, I'm trying to move the slide to the next slide.
There you go.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay. So the power of us is my company's motto, and this is the story that I'm going to talk through today is really about our global commitment to diversity and inclusion, but also how it was very recently tested locally. So going to the next slide. Okay. So here's a quick picture in terms of, Thomson Reuters and our values. And a few months ago, what we did was we unveiled a new statement on diversity and inclusion. And the note that you see on the slide now is the inclusion part was both gender identity as well as sexual orientation that was put out in the statement. This was unrolled by a series of presentations as well as a personal statement by our CEO, Jim Smith. And here's what Jim said. He talked about, diversity being essential both for innovation but also our market success. And some of what we've started to do in Thomson Reuters recently is to consciously kind of integrate within our Pride at Work, which is our employee resource group, and also in terms of, what the whole Pride at Work does for Thomson Reuters. So we do a lot of things, and we've grown a lot over the last few years. And this year specifically, what Pride at Work is doing is launching 2 key initiatives to align with Jim's emphasis on innovation and collaboration. So starting next month in June, we're launching what we call as the Innovation Fest, which is a crowdsourced LGBT-centric event for idea generation for our products and services. And we're hoping that it's going to have a direct lead into our revenue generation for the company. So if any of you out there are interested and want to know more about this, or have your companies have focused LGBT services from Thomson Reuters, please do get in touch with me when we could talk about it. And the second initiative that we're doing is in September, where we're launching what we call the Friends Toolkit, which is a guide that we're putting together for our non-LGBT friends, and we're educating and spreading awareness along with practical ways that they can become more involved. In terms of, what Pride at Work, the employee resource group looks in terms of numbers, we have over close to about 1,100 people globally, and they're representing over 37 countries. In terms of India, where it's kind of really picked up in the last year from 2013, we have about 77 members, and 66 of them are based in Bangalore, where I am based. In terms of, the investment or the policies that we've kind of worked around in Thomson Reuters was a new policy that we announced towards the end of 2013. And that was around new domestic partner benefits policy. And this basically covered 3 areas. One was a group health plan for the spouse or dependents. The second was group life and accidental insurance, where your spouse could end up becoming a beneficiary. And the third was also to put your spouse down towards your retirement plan, which is your pension, again, as down as a beneficiary. So at Thomson Reuters, as somebody who works here, this was absolutely fantastic news for me. But if you look at the note that's in orange on the slide at the bottom, this slide was actually prepared for the Out and Equal Roundtable Summit that we had with Celise in Bangalore earlier this year in Jan. And what it refers to, as Celise and Kevin both mentioned, is the Supreme Court decision of December. And this is where, for me, the story gets really interesting. Okay. So how does, Section 377 affect companies and their LGBT employees in India. So I was, of course, at that point we didn't know yet what the impact of this ruling was. So I was, of course, very happy to hear of the new benefits. And, when the open enrollment period came around, I went into the system and signed up my partner. And this was last November. And, of course, everything changed because in December, the Supreme Court decision came out, criminalizing homosexuality. But the first thing Thomson Reuters did was we issued an internal statement reaffirming our commitment to LGBT employees in India, which was a good start. Now, my wife is an American citizen, and last year, during the course of all this, we also, the American Supreme Court made an important decision to knock down the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA. So suddenly my wife and I, we were entitled to federal spouse benefits in the U.S., and we decided, okay, it's maybe time to, get my green card. So we started putting all this together, the application, and my lawyer in New York thought that it would be a great idea if I got a letter from Thomson Reuters to say that my wife was listed as my, enrolled for the benefits under me. So I went to my local HR and asked for the letter. And in confirming the benefits with our insurance provider, we found out that it actually not, in fact, issued the benefit. And my wife had been uninsured since November. And this is when it got really tricky. And this was just less than 2 weeks ago. And so our HR folks in TR had to go back to the insurance company and ask for my partner to be enrolled. And until that point, the insurance provider had actually been non-committal about the state of benefits post the Supreme Court ruling in December. So suddenly, my partner and I became the test case. Everybody, that we spoke to started saying it was a gray area, and we had more emails going back and forth. And then, the ultimate happened. The test failed because the insurance provider came back to the HR department with the statement, which is on the next slide. Bear with me. Okay, there it is. So this is the message that went out, and basically the insurance provider was, criminalizing same-sex marriage. And this not just went out to me, but also went out to a lot of our private work, employee resource group leaders, and some key diversity and inclusion folks, both in India as well as globally. And to be honest, whilst this was quite a trying time, this is where I saw, Thomson Reuters really start to mobilize. And at the same time, we made sure we got the clarification on the law from one of the attorneys working on the case in Supreme Court, who happens to be with a legal NGO based in Bangalore. And what we then found out was this is what the law says. What the law really says is that the Supreme Court decision itself is, that the definition of carnal acts is unclear and not established by any precedent, and that the law does not criminalize relationships or identities. So obviously, armed with this new information, our HR folks went back to the insurance provider and said, look, you're mistaken. The law does not criminalize same-sex marriage. And there is no legal problem whatsoever with providing same-sex benefits. It probably helped that Thomson Reuters, we are one of the largest providers of legal information. And what resulted as part of these discussions was the next slide, which is in terms of, that it was fantastic news. The provider, who is one of the largest health insurance providers, not just in India, but worldwide, actually, ended up taking the entire, canceling the benefits back and reinstating them. So for me, what started off as probably one of the hardest weeks turned out, and a real emotional roller coaster ended up being, to hear this fantastic news was fabulous. But this, to me, was not just about, us being a test case, me and my partner, but also a lot of people coming together. This wasn't just about, employee resource groups. It was also about, local and global HR. It was about local and global D&I teams. And it is this collective power of us that, I saw through 1 week, from a Monday to Friday, completely at its best and worst when, how we started off. And they were there were definitely some lessons and that I've got in terms of what I've extracted from this whole experience and what I'd like to quickly kind of talk through and share with all of you. So the first one was definitely around the processes and how we put them out. So I think no one should have to be a test case, and certainly not by surprise. One of the things I would definitely recommend is that anybody rolling out a domestic partner benefit plan, please fully test the procedures and processes before an individual employee has to experience them. There is no room for gray areas here. We just cannot allow that. The second was around, within the same was I happened to be senior enough in my organization that I was able to get a pretty quick turnaround and action on this. And I'm not ashamed to say that there were moments that I cried, probably more than once. And that's even though I knew I had the support of my leadership team and that I was already out. The second thing that I saw that was a key one for me was the interpretation of the law and the legal expertise. Our insurance provider's interpretation of the law was completely incorrect. But it's a common misconception in India. If there's one thing I had to pick out of the 6 that I've listed here, it's probably the interpretation or the misinterpretation of this law. This is what it all boils down to. And the fact that our folks, across TR and various levels were able to get this clarity right away and educate the provider was definitely, for me, the single biggest key turning point in this whole story. The third one was, is around commitment, which is this wouldn't have been possible without the strong support of people. We always talk about the employer resource groups. But, we have allies, for example, for me, I'm lucky enough that my immediate supervisors and the leadership who sits at the top of the chain of command in my vertical were completely on board. Our India DNI as well as the local HR leaders, were quick to act. And also, not to discount our global DNI and employee resource groups who not just stepped in with valuable information, but also acted as a support system for me. So, it's not the responsibility of one geography or one department. I think collectively we must all come together to make something like this work. The fourth one is around privacy. I think confidentiality and privacy is really important, especially in LGBT-related issues or cases that we deal with. And I cannot stress enough in terms of how important this is. People specifically, I see this every day in India. People in India, might or might not be out, but they should be allowed the choice of what information, we share, while still getting the benefits they're entitled to. And there needs to be an absolute wall of privacy between the policy conversation on one hand and whatever the individual personnel issues are involved on the other. So my fifth one was about staying strategic, which is there were times when I was really upset, but I think it was helpful that I stayed calm and professional, at least in all my official interactions. I definitely try to keep the emotion out of it, and I think that worked. Logically, it helped definitely get that resolution that we wanted to see. And lastly, network and allies do help. So finally, as all of this was going on, for me, it was personally wonderful to be able to draw on the support of other LGBT employees and allies throughout the organization. And some of these were part of my own, private work ERGs, but most weren't. Some were even allies from, friends that I made through the Out and Equal conference and who'd been through similar things. So, all of this really gave me a lot of moral as well as strategic kind of support and helped me talk through some of what my next steps could have been. So really, that's my story, and thanks for listening. The only last thing I'd like to add is, in my experience, having lived in a lot of geographies, and now that I live in India, so to speak, almost coming back home for me for the last few years, in my experience, it's not really about local culture, because what what we are fighting is upstream against is essentially a Western law. It was imported by the British in 1861, and we haven't been able to kind of shake free of it in many ways. In fact, we have, as of last month, a new law granting full equality to transgender people in India. And there are only 3 countries in the world, and all of them seem to pretty much sit in this, subcontinent. So I definitely think, we need to partner more. We need to have an open dialogue. And there's definitely, we can keep calm and carry on, and there will be a happy ending. So I'd like to also thank Celeste and Out and Equal for inviting me to speak here today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions either on this call or later via email. Thank you.
Lakshmi, thank you very much for that informative and personal viewpoint of what's happening in India. We really, truly appreciate you sharing that with all of us on this call. We do have questions that have come in, and there's still time for people to write some more questions if they have it. I'm going to go ahead and throw some of these questions out. Some will be for the full panel, and some are addressed to an individual speaker. The first one is really kind of to the entire panel, and it is, what is the most important factor to consider when trying to get a country or its citizens to change their policy/attitudes towards LGBT equality? That's a big question, and I think, Kevin, you kind of talked a little bit about the respecting the culture, and I know, Celeste, that with your travels as well, that's something that we've been focusing on here. Celeste, do you want to take a stab at that, and then we'll go to Kevin?
Yeah, it is a big question and an important one, and I'd love to hear Kevin and Lakshmi's perspective. But I'm a big proponent of incremental steps, and I think the work that we're doing kind of day in and day out, expanding the circle of conversations, of people coming out, of people being willing to have the difficult conversations, the situations that, like Lakshmi just described. It helps people make those connections in the workplace, and the workplace is changing society, and all of that will eventually move us to changing hearts and minds, and eventually the laws of these countries. But no, I don't think there's a real silver bullet, and unfortunately, but I think just the ongoing work. But again, I'd love to hear from Kevin and Lakshmi.
Yeah, let me do my best to answer that. And I'm not sure if the question's necessarily worded the best, because there are so many cases, so many examples just around Asia that you could get kind of caught up with. So let's take an example like Singapore, and what the local activists on the ground have done. There is a one-party system in Singapore, right? And the laws are that you have zero right to free speech. You have zero ability to kind of bill out, rally, stand in front of the government buildings and really tell them what you think. That does not exist. So what the local activists have done is really try to work within the system. When a government politician comes out, and this has happened in the recent past, and says, we are not actively enforcing Section 377A of the Penal Code. Well, when that senior official comes out and says that, but then another arm of the government is not acting in line with that, the local activists will go to the media and say, look, the local arm of the government is actually not doing what the government said they were going to do, and we just want to make sure, again, going back to this word harmony, because Asia really likes this word, we just want to make sure that the government is doing what it says. And so for me, that's just a really great example of how I think a lot of change is happening in Asia. It's happening through the system. People are fighting to change things through the rules that they have been given. And I see it a lot in China. obviously where a significant number of rights are curtailed or are not available at all, and in Singapore as well, where those rights are really not there as well. So to some extent, I would suggest what Felice Berry said, which is step by step. And then the other part I'd say is being very conscious of the local culture, because believe it or not, in Singapore, it's not just the government that likes that approach. It's the people as well. The people like that collective approach. The people like the harmony. So it's also being conscious of that as well. And I already think the companies who are there on the ground, the people who are leading their LGBT networks and so on there on the ground, are actually being very, very conscious of this. So, I think for the people on the call, when you are reaching out to your contacts in Asia and talking about how do we set up an LGBT network, how do we go forward, my recommendation would be to not completely just listen to them, but really take on board their considerations and any sensitivities they raise, because they are important.
Anything to add, Lakshmi?
I was just going to say that, there are always going to be progressive elements within the local culture, no matter how traditional the societies are. We are, if I were to talk about China or India, where we've got a, huge presence, they are quite diverse. And I think one of the things that I personally, have kind of come to conclude, having been back in India for the last 4 years and sat through so many training sessions on, LGBT awareness, is that we really need to tap into local roots. We need more local expertise, because one thing that, if I were to take the example of a country like India, we're so diverse. It's not about local culture, because there isn't a local culture. You go from city to city, it's a different culture. It's really about, trying to find something that, if I'm sitting with a group of middle managers who we need to kind of educate or, sensitize towards LGBT-related issues, we need to have somebody that they can identify within the room. Otherwise, they already come into that room with a preconceived, notion that this is LGBT is a Western import. And the more, so, for me, really is to kind of build that locally, build that expertise, and have them become the advocates of change in corporate workplaces.
Right. We have a few questions that are focusing on transgender inclusion. So I think if we could just get a quick response from each of you, what are your organizations doing to make sure that transgender is included in your policies or programs?
Yeah.
Kevin, did you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, in all the research that community business does, we absolutely include transgender. And I think in all of the local advocacy work that's going on, at least in Hong Kong, definitely in India as well, when we're working with organizations there, it's absolutely included there. And we're always keeping an eye on that as well. I do want to highlight, though, and I think this is really important, and just being as honest as possible, that the topic of transgender for the general population is very, very taboo, where sexual orientation is still very much taboo. Like transgender, at least in Hong Kong, mainland China, and Singapore, really, really hard to talk about, really, really hard to have discussions about, just in the general population. And then when you bring it up in the workplace, and when we reach out to companies and try to have that discussion around transgender, it's very challenging as well. And of course, we work it into, again, our research when we're working with companies on policy and so on. We're having that discussion, but it's very difficult. The other thing I would say is, when we're working with companies on benefits and we're having that discussion around, do you have benefits for same-sex partners, I'm always asking, do you actually have unique benefits for any of your transgender employees? And very, 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 very few of them actually have provisions for their transgender employees. Again, even your leading companies. And I think it's just one of those things that trails. The companies coming out to Asia have been slow to get benefits for their LGBT and gay, lesbian, and bisexual employees and their partners, and then transgender is following even thereafter. And again, I think a lot of it has to do with society and culture, right? Because at the end of the day, the local expertise, the people who are actually going out and asking for these benefits from the providers, are not familiar with these topics. They don't know about these topics, right? So they're first being educated on sexual orientation, and then later transgender issues. So it's absolutely a process. And again, going back to where you guys, many of you are calling in from, the West, don't forget that Asia is many, many years behind the West. And in the U.S., it was a process as well. In the West, it was a process as well. And so these companies, they're taking it one step at a time. Sexual orientation is one topic they're handling, and they're absolutely getting to transgender. I think it's just taking more time than some of us would like.
And Lakshmi, what about TR?
I mean, transgender people are included in all our LGBT policies. So, from a policy perspective, we make sure as part of our discussion that transgender is included. But having said that, I think there's a larger issue here. I mean, at least in India, for example, we were about 12,000 people across all our sites. We have only one open transgender person in our organization here. And I think a large reason for that is, transgender people by and large in India as a culture it's a class issue. Most of them fall in, almost below the poverty line. And so there is a whole other issue around trans people and why we don't necessarily see them in the workforce. And I think now with, certain NGOs are definitely doing a lot in specifically one or two states in India where they're working towards this upliftment. But at the same time, you look at a center like our Manila Center, where in the Philippines, it's a lot more open. And, we have many transgender employees in our organization there.
Thanks. And Celeste, do you want to talk about what Out and Equal is doing for the transgender community?
We are committed to equality for transgender, lesbian, gay, bisexual, all of us, and our allies. We have a transgender advisory committee that is extremely supportive and helpful in our ongoing work to look at the workshops that are offered at the summit that are helping us lead workplace-focused trainings at Southern Comfort that are looking for ways that we can continue to make the workplace an out and equal workplace for transgender people. And we also offer a transgender-specific building bridges training, and we offer consulting services if somebody is transitioning on the job. So there's lots of ways that we continue to support the transgender community, and the transgender community really supports the ongoing work of Out and Equal.
Great. There are more questions, but I see that our time has come to a close here. So what we'll do is we'll take those questions and we will get those to the appropriate person as they are directed to and get an answer, and we'll post those on the archive of this town call. With that, I want to thank everybody for participating. Celeste and Kevin and Lakshmi, I think there was some phenomenal information that was shared, and there is a lot more work to be done, but I appreciate everything that you have contributed to this town call. And just before we close, are there any closing comments from Celeste, Kevin, or Lakshmi?
I just would like to thank everyone.
Yeah, great. This is Kevin. I'd like to thank everyone and just point out again that if you have any further questions, please reach out to me, kevin.burns@communitybusiness.org. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you again.
And thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Lakshmi and John. It's been a fabulous conversation. Look forward to seeing people sometime, and certainly at the Out and Equal Workplace Summit in November.
Great. And just a reminder, the next town call is June 26th on Pride Perspectives. And as Celeste said, we hope that you will all come to San Francisco November 3rd through the 6th and join us at what it promises to be a phenomenal workplace summit. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day, a good evening, and thank you again.